I'll introduce myself in a second, but we're going to talk about OpenAPI, how to get the most out of it, living with it in the real world, and just some other best practices around OpenAPI. Whilst you're feeling interactive and clapping, by clapping, actually, show me, who knows what OpenAPI is? Thank you, thank you. Yeah, who uses OpenAPI in their job? Pretty much everybody. Anybody not use it? I'm going to brave enough to clap. OK, great. So we have an audience that's super familiar with it, so I won't spend much time on the slide describing what is OpenAPI. Let me talk about me very quickly. So my name is Josh Twist. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Zuplo that you can see here on my chest. I'm from the UK originally, but live in Seattle in the States now. I used to work at Microsoft. I worked for them in the UK. They moved me over to the US. At Microsoft, I was part of the Azure group. I founded several services there. Azure Logic Apps was created by my teams, Azure Power Automate Pro, Azure Mobile Services, and perhaps most notably, Azure API Management was created by my teams as well. After that, I was head of product at Facebook, where I led the Facebook analytics team, the new experiences org, and then I was head of product at Stripe, where I led the payment methods team, so something like 30+ APIs that we'd look after. So long-time developer tools person, extremely passionate about developer experience, and long-time API person. So I've been a vendor in the API space before. I've been a customer. I've worked at places where they've built their own API gateway. I've seen it all. Very brief now, a little mention of the company I work for. This whole session is not a pitch. We're going to talk about OpenAPI, but I will just mention what we do quickly and why we do it. So Zuplo is an API management product that actually competes with the product I founded at Microsoft. And that's based on observations I saw at Microsoft around just how difficult these products are to use and how expensive. And one symptom of that is that these products are not used by smaller startup customers. And that's because they're just too hard and too expensive. So my mission is to democratize API management by making it easy to use, effortless to adopt, and reasonably affordable so that you're not terrified of using that thing. And that looks like this big list. This is a great time to take a picture if you want to take, because I don't want to talk through this whole slide. But it is designed for developers. It fits your operational workflow as an engineer with native GitOps. It's natively programmable, no plugins. You literally write code that executes inside the gateway. It's multi-cloud. You don't have to pick, are you going to be on Google, are you going to be on this? It works with all of them. And it runs at the edge. So you deploy to one region, Earth, and you do that in under 20 seconds. From deciding you want a new gateway in the world, 20 seconds later, you'll have a gateway running at 300 data centers all over the world. It's fully managed, auto-scaled, and you get a Stripe. Everyone says Stripe quality API experience now. It's just like a given thing. I've seen it so many times today. We try and give you that out of the box. And guess what? It's powered by OpenAPI. So that's why I'm here to talk about OpenAPI. You folks are all experts. You've demonstrated that to me by all the applause you've been giving to those questions. Who's still calling it Swagger? OK. You all get slapped. Not anymore. Let's call it OpenAPI. Let's give it its real name. It does not have a space in it. I am not one of the editors of OpenAPI. I know most of those folks. They're real passionate about that. Don't put a space in it. There was a space in my talk title that was published on Nordic APIs. I know I'm going to take some heat for that. So no spaces. As you all know, it is the kind of industry standard. It is the winner from the specification wars of RAML and Blueprint. You all remember those? Yeah, I can tell who's been doing this longer than others based on the kind of tiredness of the nods to that. It's language agnostic. It doesn't matter what your backend is written in, be in Python, PHP, Laravel, whatever. It's machine readable, and it's somewhat human readable. And I don't like reading them. I don't like writing them. They're pretty ugly documents. But in theory, I could look at an OpenAPI doc. So you also know what it is. You're going to get lots of memes in this talk, by the way. It's really hard, is the first thing. It's really hard to actually do it well. OK, now let's do honesty now, honest show. Who feels like really proud of their OpenAPI specs? Anyone willing to clap for that? Wusses. Yeah, this guy. We're going to test you later, my friend. OK, so it's hard to produce a quality OpenAPI document. Code-generated OpenAPI. Who's generating their OpenAPIs by code? Be honest. Come on. It's OK. Quite a few. No one, a clap. Thank you for being bold enough to make some noise. Generally considered in sort of the API-first world, not the best way to do it. You get sort of a poorish quality API document. The one good thing is it's probably quite true to what your code is doing. I can tell you as a person running a gateway powered by OpenAPI, the reality of what is in someone's OpenAPI document and what their API is doing, I mean, just different worlds quite often. But what else are you going to do? Writing by hand is hideous. Tooling is so-so. I will give a notable mention to Stoplight, which I think is probably the best visual designer out there. But I'll actually talk later about the approach that I like to use and my teams use. And I'll be pitching someone else's product in that case, actually, which I think is great. So we'll talk about that in a bit. Where do I find the value? What's the point of this? Why would I invest in this document? Why do we all have low-quality OpenAPI documents? You know, what's the point? There's just no value in it. It's for documentation, right? And ultimately, who cares about documentation? You know, if it's out of date, you know, it can't be out of date if there is no documentation. Well, let's think about the API lifecycle in fullness. It's a circle because we tend to move around these things, right? We come back and we do design. We've got design. You all know what that means. That's what this track is about, actually. Then ideally, actually, you should be mocking. I've worked at some of the best engineering teams in the world. I actually think Facebook might be the best engineering team in the world, seriously. I mean, just look at their open source stuff to sort of have a feel of that. And the key thing to being a really great engineering organization is shortening the feedback loop. There's very, very quickly learning and as fast and tight cycles as you can. I mean, it's like Agile++. So you really should be using mocked APIs with your clients, with your UI designers that are using that API very quickly to identify problems, shorten the feedback loop. So mocking, the implementation of the API, you can generate code stubs from it, etc. Documentation, we all need documentation. We need to test our APIs. I've seen there's a bunch of talks, just one this morning, I think, actually, about like testing using OpenAPI. We need to govern our APIs. We need to deploy them. And particularly if you're using a gateway, OpenAPI is a great way of doing that as well, because most tools have some way of converting an OpenAPI into their proprietary format. With Zuplo, it's literally what powers our gateway as an OpenAPI document. How you secure it, generating clients. There's a bunch of talks about that today. And then I just added, actually, at the bottom down here is AI. You know, there's a great talk by Z or Z, depending which side of the pond you come from, this morning. And I actually think, you know, you've already seen that the way you tell OpenAI, so confusing talking about OpenAI in an OpenAPI talk, the way you tell OpenAI to talk to an API is you give it an OpenAPI document, it works out the rest. So I'm actually not even sure we'll ever have like human-readable documentation in the future. I kind of agree with his premise, but I think something like a truly machine-readable specification is actually going to be great. So how do you get the maximum value? How do you have the most optimum API lifecycle and get the maximum value out of your OpenAPI doc? You use OpenAPI to power all of those things in that lifecycle. I call it the OpenAPI Wheel of Fortune. You literally get incrementing, exponentially growing superpowers if you focus on your OpenAPI and you use it for all of these things. I couldn't come up with enough points for some of the little ones, but you kind of get the idea that it really is this like Wheel of Fortune. If you check these things, your APIs are going to be, you're going to be better at managing them, better at governing them. All of the benefits that we've just talked about, that can come from you generating and living with a quality OpenAPI document. So my recommendation is put OpenAPI at the center of your world. There's just so much value. Now, to do this well, you do need a quality OpenAPI. I've only got one volunteer who is willing to sort of stick their neck out and say they feel good about their quality of the document. I'm sure some of you are just being shy. But honestly, I know this from something I'll tell you later, that the vast majority of them out there are an absolute mess. And you could not extract much value in that lifecycle from those documents that are out there in the world today. But developers don't like doing things that are hygiene. You know, you want to be building things. You want to be making progress. You want to be moving forward. We all hate filling in our Jira tickets or updating some documentation that doesn't matter. So the real key to doing this better is actually do put this as the center of your universe. It's one of the reasons why we put it at the center of our gateway. Because if it's the OpenAPI document that's powering the gateway, first of all, then what your APIs are doing actually has to be what's in the OpenAPI document. And it becomes a forcing function that that thing is kept up to date, maintained, is in good health, and then you get all of these other benefits. Everything from linting that you can do to help govern your APIs, etc. But it's easier said than done. I think the best approach here is to go design first. So what I'm trying to do here is like create this motivation for you to be more excited about OpenAPI by seeing how much it can do for you with automation and how you can mirror the tighter feedback cycle that you get when you operate like some of the best engineering organizations out there, Facebook, etc. And so you've got to use the right tools for that. Avoid code first, I think, is one recommendation. It generates pretty poor OpenAPI. Often, honestly, I see these documents and they're not even valid OpenAPI most of the time that these code generators are doing. Use the right tools. Consider Stoplight. But my recommendation for you, actually, is to use a piece of open source technology from my rival now, my former employee, Microsoft, called TypeSpec. Who's seen TypeSpec? Put your hand up. So a couple of folks. This guy's very excited about it. Are you going to talk about it? Yeah. Oh, awesome. I am like your setup here. Are you up next? No. OK. On this track? Great. Well, this is like the ultimate tip. So I'm going to give him a tiny taster, and then you can go hang around for this guy's session if you like what you see here. So we use it. It's a project by Microsoft. It's used internally by my old team in Azure to actually create their OpenAPI specs. And it gets rid of the pain of writing OpenAPI. OpenAPI is so verbose. The classic thing that drives me nuts is when you think about a schema in OpenAPI, you would have to have a schema for inserting a widget and a schema for updating a widget, and they'd have to be separate schemas. Because when I insert a widget, it doesn't have an ID. But when I update it, or when I get it, it does. So how do I make my schema dynamic? They thought of that. They solved that problem with TypeSpec. Let me just show you it real quick before I set you. What's your name? Before I set you up for Daniel's session. I wish people would do this for my sessions. It'd be great. So go to zuplo.link/typespec. That's just a shortcut. And there's actually a nice little playground you can go to that always loads very slowly. They should fix this. So we'll let that load in the background whilst I'm doing it. It's just a playground where you can play with it. And they've created a language that looks a lot like TypeScript to define an API. Don't you love conference Wi-Fi? It's given up. Let me try again. Oh, there we go. OK. So it loaded in. So this is the playground. I'm going to zoom in so you all can see it. And you can just pick a sample here. And I'm going to show you very quickly what I mean. So this is what it looks like on the left, this sort of TypeScript-like language. But look how short that is. It's 34 lines of code, including braces. And then look at the OpenAPI that it's generated. And that's YAML, which is shorter than JSON. And this is going to be, I don't know, 206 lines of code. And it's little nice things like this. So here is a widget that's been defined. And it has an ID property, but remember, you only want the ID on certain operations. Well, you can actually mark that. This is only visible on read and on update, so it's not visible on create, and it dynamically generates different schemas for you. The engineers, you know, we really like working in text. People are always trying to force us to use visual tools, but we're really good at writing concise text. It's just our superpower. So what they've done here at Microsoft, super applause for them, is to create this beautiful, tight way of generating OpenAPI from a very, very nice definition that looks like the type definitions for your code. So that's my recommendation. The other thing that matters is, is getting good quality. So you can still use TypeSpec and generate a very poor quality OpenAPI document. It's quite common. And I started looking at this. We were building our support for OpenAPI in Zuplo, and so I wanted to test out as many OpenAPI documents as I could, loading them into the system. And I found a website called apis.guru. It's a huge repository by a former Postman employee where he just went out and collected all of the OpenAPI docs he could. It's a cool place. Good Lord, are they all garbage. I mean, I was trying to upload them, Zuplo was crashing, and it was because they were just terrible documents. And that's where we had the idea to build this product that we're going to launch today, completely free, completely open source, not necessarily directly related to Zuplo, that you can all try, that we're launching today, actually. This is kind of the official launch, called Rate My OpenAPI. So you can go to ratemyopenapi.com. And it is powered using linting technology that will look at your OpenAPI and try and understand the best practices. It is also powered by LLMs, so it's using AI to look at it and also look for other clues. This is the first version. It's 100% free. Just go up there and upload your OpenAPI doc, and we'll send you a report. It's fully open source. And the goal of what we're trying to get to, actually, I'll just sort of give you a quick preview of what this thing looks like here. So this is the homepage. You would come in here, you would upload your file. But I'm not going to do that now. It'll take a little bit of time. But I can show you some examples. So here's Zapier's OpenAPI rating. So you see we give you an overall score, so you can tell how you're doing. And the thing's got a little bit of attitude, so it might give you some sass and some API-related puns in there as well. But it's going to give you some advice about what's going wrong, and then a detailed breakdown of how you're doing on documentation generation, on the completeness, on SDK generation. In this case, this one's quite good, and how you're doing on security based on that. So we'd also love your feedback. So if you do try this, try it out, pop down here, tell us what you think, send us a comment on that. We'd be much appreciated. But that's something that we're launching right now. So I think that's pretty much the end of my talk. So follow me. I am at Josh Twist on Twitter. You can email me, josh@zuplo.com. We'd love your feedback on Rate My OpenAPI. Give it a whirl. And obviously, go and try Zuplo. It's completely free. It's completely self-serve. Hope we got you out of lunch OK. You all seem fairly awake. And yeah, thanks for coming to my talk.
All right.